Hi everyone and welcome to the respiratory system part 2. In this section we'll be looking at the lower respiratory system. So the lower airway consists of the larynx, the trachea, bronchi and the lungs. The larynx connects the pharynx with the trachea. It has three main functions. Firstly, as an air passageway between the pharynx and the lungs. Secondly, a protective function to prevent solids and liquids from entering the respiratory tree. Thirdly, it is involved in speech production. It is composed of 9 cartilages, 3 unpaired and 6 paired. The first cartilage is the thyroid cartilage, and this is the largest, and it's known as the Adam's apple. The second is the cricoid cartilage, and this is the only complete ring. It connects the larynx and the trachea. Thirdly, the epiglottis, which prevents food from entering into the larynx. This diagram can be found in your textbooks, and you can see the epiglottis at the top of the diagram, the thyroid cartilage, which is the largest, and lastly the cricoid cartilage. The epiglottis is an elastic cartilage which is covered by mucosa, and it's on a stalk which is attached to the thyroid cartilage. It attaches to the back of the tongue. During swallowing, the larynx is pulled superiorly or upwards, and the epiglottis tips inferiorly to cover and seal the laryngeal inlet. This keeps food out of the lower respiratory tract. This diagram shows a dissected specimen of this area. Membranes are attached between the cartilage. We can see the thyroid membrane and the cricothyroid membrane. Other cartilages are located between the thyroid and the cricoid cartilages, but it is not essential to know these. Membranes and ligaments between the thyroid and cricoid cartilages are responsible for forming the false and true vocal cords. A pair of mucosal vocal folds, where the true vocal cords cover over the ligaments, and these are white because they are avascular. The glottis is the space between the vocal cords, and the laryngeal muscles control the length and size of this opening. Sound is produced by the vibration of vocal cords as the air is exhaled. Taut vocal folds result in a high pitch, and relaxed vocal folds result in a low pitch. After the larynx is the trachea, and this is composed of smooth muscle tissue and C-shaped cartilages. Between 16 and 20 C-shaped cartilages of hyaline cartilage are joined by fibroelastic connective tissue. This allows the trachea to be flexible for bending, but ensures that it stays open despite pressure changes during breathing. The posterior open parts of the trachea cartilage abut the esophagus, and the trachealis muscle can decrease the diameter of the trachea. This allows the esophagus to expand when food is swallowed, and also enables food to be forcibly expelled. The wall of the trachea has layers that are common to many tubular organs, and these filter, warm and moisten the incoming air. These include the mucous membrane, the submucosa and the adventitia. The trachea divides in the thorax into 2 main or primary bronchi, and the primary bronchi divide into right and left at the angle of Louis, known as the carina. This diagram, again available in your textbooks, shows the pathway of the trachea, and as it splits, it travels into the right and the left primary bronchi. This area here is the angle of Louis, or the carina. The bronchial tree refers to the many divisions of the bronchi as they divide to create the lungs. The primary bronchi divide into secondary or lobar bronchi, and each supplies 1 lobe. There are 3 on the right and 2 on the left. The lobar bronchi branch into tertiary or segmental bronchi, and there are approximately 25 divisions between the trachea and the alveoli. This diagram, again available in your textbooks, shows the branching of the bronchial tree. So the trachea to the primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi. These then split into bronchioles, which end in the terminal bronchioles at the alveoli. The structure of the airways change progressively from the trachea to the terminal bronchioles. The first 7 divisions consist of a wall comprising of cartilage and smooth muscle. It has an epithelial lining with cilia and mucus-secreting goblet cells. This enables any particulate matter that have passed down into the airways to be captured and prevent further passage down to the lungs. The next 16 to 18 divisions do not have any cartilage, and it's a progressively thinner muscular layer. A single layer of ciliated cells and fewer goblet cells are present. As we can see from this diagram, the terminal bronchiole passes into respiratory bronchioles, and each of these ends in alveoli. Alveolar sacs are groups of alveoli at the end of the terminal bronchioles, and each lung contains approximately 300 million alveoli. This provides a surface area of anywhere between 40 to 80 meters squared. Type 1 alveolar cells provide a thin layer for gas exchange. Type 2 cells produce pulmonary surfactant, and we'll discuss this later on. The alveoli also contain macrophages, and these contribute to the defense mechanisms of the lungs. It is worth noting that the alveoli are highly vascularized, and this is to encourage the transfer of respiratory gases from the tissues into the bloodstream. Air-filled alveoli account for the most lung volume, and this provides a great area for gas exchange. The alveolar wall, as we've said, consists of a single layer of squamous epithelial cells, type 1 cells, surrounded by a basal lamina. It is approximately 15 times thinner than tissue paper, and the external wall is covered by a cobweb of capillaries. The respiratory membrane, which is the fusion of the basal laminas of the alveolar wall and capillary walls, allows for gas exchange. This is the air-blood barrier, the respiratory membrane, and is where gas exchange occurs. Oxygen diffuses from the air in the alveolus to the blood in the capillary. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood in the capillary into the air in the alveolus. At a microscopic level, the alveoli are surrounded by fine elastic fibres, and this allows for them to stretch during inhalation and contract during exhalation. Alveoli interconnect via alveolar pores, and macrophages are free to float through the alveoli. This image under electron microscopy shows detail of the alveoli within the lungs. The lungs are paired organs, and each is enclosed and protected by a pleural membrane. We can see that the left lung consists of 2 lobes, and the right lung consists of 3 lobes, and this matches the divisions of the bronchi described earlier. Each is cone-shaped with anterior, lateral, and posterior surfaces contacting the ribs. The superior tip is the apex, and this sits just deep to the clavicle. The concave inferior surface rests on the diaphragm, and it is termed the base. The hilus, or hilum, is an indentation on the medial surface of the lung, and it is the place where blood vessels, bronchi, lymph vessels, and nerves enter and exit the lungs. Around each lung is a flattened sac of serous membrane called the pleura. The parietal pleura is the outer layer, and the visceral pleura is the inner layer which sits directly on the lung. The pleural cavity is a slit-like potential space filled with pleural fluid between these 2 layers. Lungs can slide, but the separation from the pleura is resisted, so it is like a film between 2 plates of glass. Lungs cling to the thoracic wall and are forced to expand and recoil as the volume of thoracic cavity changes during breathing. Pleural fluid acts as lubrication for this movement. Each lobe within the lung is made up of bronchopulmonary segments separated by dense connective tissue, and each segment receives air from an individual segmental or tertiary bronchus. There are approximately 10 bronchopulmonary segments in each lung. This limits the spread of infection within lungs and enables infected or damaged portions to be removed more easily, as only small vessels span each segment. The smallest division that is visible with the naked eye is the lobule, and it's hexagonal on the surface, approximately the size of a pencil rubber. It is served by the large bronchiole and its branches, and black carbon can be visible on the connective tissue, separating individual lobules in smokers and in city dwellers. We have covered the blood supply to the lungs in the cardiovascular section, but we'll briefly revise this information. You'll be aware that there is a double blood supply to the lungs. Deoxygenated blood travels from the heart via the left and right pulmonary arteries, and these bring oxygen-poor blood to the lungs for oxygenation. They branch along with the bronchial tree, and the smallest of these will feed into the pulmonary capillary network, the cobweb of capillaries, which surround each alveoli. Oxygenated blood returns to the heart from the pulmonary veins, and this is via the right and left, superior and inferior veins. The oxygenated blood supply to the lungs comes from bronchial arteries from the aorta, and deoxygenated blood from the lungs returns via the pulmonary vein and the bronchial vein. In the next section, we'll be looking at respiration and ventilation.